Whose Ferrari is this? There's no way you own something like this.
Mine, officer. I showed you my registration already.
That paper doesn't prove a thing. How'd you really get it?
I bought it legally.
Yeah? You expect me to believe that? Step back.
Why are you treating me like this?
Either you let me search this car right now or you're going in cuffs.
What you just heard wasn't a routine traffic stop. It was an officer assuming guilt without evidence, escalating a situation based on bias instead of law. In less than 30 seconds, he threatened arrest without probable cause and attempted to force a search he had no legal grounds to conduct. What he didn't realize is that the man he targeted had just been appointed as the new police chief, hired specifically to stop racial profiling and clean up misconduct inside this precinct. In one reckless encounter, the officer exposed exactly the culture the new leadership was brought in to dismantle. By the end of this story, there will be bodycam footage reviewed, supervisors called in, lawyers involved, and a career permanently altered. The driver was Chief Daniel Harris, 48 years old. He had just been appointed as the new police chief of the department. After 22 years in law enforcement, including 12 years in command-level positions. Before this appointment, Harris served as deputy chief in a neighboring city, where he led a reform initiative that reduced civilian complaints by 37% in 3 years, and implemented mandatory bias training across all patrol divisions. He holds a master's degree in criminal justice administration, completed executive leadership training through a nationally recognized police command program, and previously oversaw a force of more than 600 officers. His hiring was publicly announced as a turning point, a deliberate effort to rebuild community trust, strengthen accountability, and eliminate racial profiling practices within the precinct. The officer conducting the stop was Officer Ryan Mitchell, 34 years old, a patrol officer assigned to the department's South District precinct. He had been on the force for 9 years, all of them within the same division. Internal records later revealed that Mitchell had accumulated 11 civilian complaints over the course of his career. 7 of those complaints alleged discourtesy or excessive aggression during traffic stops for specifically referenced racial profiling. None resulted in suspension. In 3 separate cases, bodycam footage was either inconclusive or reviewed internally without disciplinary action. 2 complaints were dismissed for insufficient evidence. 1 resulted in a written warning that was later removed from his active file after a routine evaluation cycle. Despite the pattern, Mitchell had never faced formal suspension, demotion, or loss of patrol privileges. Supervisors consistently marked his evaluations as meets expectations. The department had been aware of the complaints for years, but until this stop, the system had protected him. The stop took place in the parking lot of Riverside Plaza, a commercial strip with restaurants and retail stores on the south side of the city. It was late afternoon. The red Ferrari was parked legally in a marked space near the entrance of a coffee shop. Officer Ryan Mitchell pulled his patrol vehicle in behind the Ferrari at an angle, partially blocking it. He activated his emergency lights briefly, then shut them off. He stepped out quickly, adjusted his vest, and approached the driver's side with a rigid posture. Chief Daniel Harris was already standing outside the vehicle with the driver's door open. His wallet and phone were in his hands. His posture was neutral. His hands were visible. Mitchell did not greet him. "Whose car is this?" Mitchell demanded as he closed the distance. "There's no way you own something like this," Harris answered calmly. "It's mine, officer. The registration is inside. I can show you." Mitchell stepped closer, entering Harris's personal space. "I saw you sitting in it. That doesn't make it yours." There was no mention of a traffic violation, no indication the vehicle had been reported stolen. The suspicion was immediate and personal. Harris retrieved his license and registration and handed them over. Mitchell glanced at them briefly, then looked back at him. "You expect me to believe this?" Mitchell said. "Be honest, how'd you really get it?" The tone was accusatory. Two pedestrians slowed down nearby. One began recording on a phone. "I purchased it," Harris replied. Legally, Mitchell's right hand hovered near his belt. "Step away from the vehicle." Harris complied immediately, taking the steps back and raising his hand slightly. He made no sudden movements. He did not raise his voice. The only escalation came from the officer. Mitchell opened the driver's door without asking further questions and leaned into the car, scanning the interior. "Officer, I do not consent to a search," Harris stated clearly. "If you've got nothing to hide, this won't be a problem," Mitchell replied without turning around. There was still no articulated probable cause, no claim of contraband in plain view, no dispatch alert. The search was proceeding because the officer did not believe the car belonged to the man standing beside it. Mitchell walked to the rear of the Ferrari and examined the license plate. "Run this plate again," he said into his radio. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle was registered to Daniel Harris. Mitchell returned unimpressed. "That doesn't mean you didn't switch plates." Each time the facts contradicted his suspicion. The accusation shifted. Harris remained still, hands visible. "Officer, what exactly is your probable cause?" "My probable cause is this doesn't make sense." Mitchell answered. The statement was recorded clearly on bodycam. There was no reference to a specific crime, no description of suspicious behavior, only disbelief. A second patrol vehicle entered the lot. The additional officer remained near the cruiser, observing. Mitchell stepped closer again. "Either you let me search this car fully, or you're going in cuffs." The threat of arrest came without lawful basis. The escalation was direct and aggressive. "I've complied with everything you've asked," Harris responded evenly. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Mitchell shot back. The dynamic was visible. An armed officer asserting authority over a compliant black man who had done nothing except stand beside a luxury vehicle the officer assumed he could not afford. A bystander's voice was heard in the background. "He didn't do anything." Mitchell ignored the comment. His focus remained fixed on Harris. "Last chance," he said. From the moment of approach to the threat of arrest, there was no evidence presented of criminal activity, no traffic infraction cited, no dispatch report initiating the stop. The encounter was driven by assumption, specifically, the assumption that a black man in a Ferrari must have obtained it unlawfully. The bodycam captured every movement, the aggressive approach, the dismissive language, the refusal to accept documentation, the shifting accusations, the immediate readiness to escalate. It unfolded in public view, and it was unmistakable. The escalation happened in front of at least a dozen witnesses. Officer Mitchell moved behind Chief Daniel Harris and grabbed his wrist without warning. "Turn around," Mitchell ordered. "I have complied with every instruction," Harris replied, keeping his voice steady. "There is no legal basis for this." "Turn around," Mitchell repeated, louder. The bystanders stepped closer. One woman holding a shopping bag spoke up. "He showed you the paperwork. You already ran the plate." Mitchell ignored her. Harris hesitated for a fraction of a second, not in resistance, but in realization. This was no longer about the car. It was no longer about paperwork. The documentation had been verified. The plate had been confirmed. The only thing left under suspicion was him. "You're detaining me?" Harris asked. "You're being investigated," Mitchell responded. "For what crime?" "We'll figure that out." That statement drew audible reactions from the crowd. "You can't just arrest someone to figure it out," a man recording said. "That's not how this works." Mitchell tightened his grip. "Back up," he barked at the bystanders. "All of you." The second patrol officer remained near the cruiser but did not intervene. Harris placed his hands behind his back voluntarily. The cuffs clicked into place. There was no struggle, no resistance, no raised voice. The physical restraint was applied to a man who had presented identification, registration, and full compliance from the start. "This is racial profiling," Harris said clearly, not shouting, not accusing emotionally, stating a fact. Mitchell responded immediately, "Don't play that card." The statement was captured on bodycam. The crowd reacted again. "He didn't do anything except be black in a Ferrari," someone said. Mitchell turned toward the speaker. "You want to join him?" The intimidation was not subtle. It was public and deliberate as Harris stood handcuffed beside his own vehicle. The humiliation was visible, not because he appeared defeated. He did not, but because the treatment was so clearly disconnected from any lawful cause. Mitchell continued speaking loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "You fit the profile," he said. "What profile?" Harris asked. "High-end vehicle theft operations." "There was no theft report," Harris replied. Dispatch confirmed the registration. Mitchell did not respond to that point. Instead, he addressed the crowd again. "You don't know what we deal with every day." What he had dealt with that day was a legally parked car and a compliant black driver. The escalation had not been triggered by behavior. It had been triggered by disbelief. At that moment, one of the bystanders said something that shifted the atmosphere. "This officer always does this," the man recording stated. "He stopped my brother twice for nothing. Always looking for something that isn't there." Another voice added, "He pulled over my cousin last month. Said the same thing. Doesn't make sense." The pattern was spoken out loud. Mitchell responded sharply, "That's enough. Step back or you'll be cited for interference." The department's own internal data would later confirm what the witnesses were saying. Officer Ryan Mitchell had accumulated 11 civilian complaints over 9 years for alleged racial profiling, 7 alleged aggressive conduct during traffic stops involving black drivers. None had resulted in suspension. In that parking lot, the pattern was no longer an internal file. It was visible. Harris stood restrained, listening as accusations continued to shift. "You're being detained until we verify everything," Mitchell said. "Everything has already been verified," Harris answered. Mitchell avoided eye contact. The psychological shift was clear in Harris's expression. At first, he had treated the stop as a misunderstanding, a routine inconvenience. But as the cuffs tightened and the crowd voiced what was happening, the realization settled in. This was not about confusion. It was about presumption. He had presented credentials. He had complied. He had spoken calmly. None of it altered the officer's assumption that he must have done something wrong. The injustice was no longer ambiguous. It was undeniable. A compliant black man, legally parked with valid documentation, was handcuffed in public because an officer could not reconcile his race with the value of his car. "Call your supervisor," Harris said firmly. Mitchell responded, "You don't give orders here." The authority dynamic was explicit. The officer's voice was louder, his posture rigid, his language dismissive. The bystanders continued filming. "This is exactly what profiling looks like," one woman said into her phone. "No cause, just assumption." Mitchell attempted to justify the detention again. "We're conducting an investigation." "What investigation?" Harris asked. "State the crime." There was no clear answer. The second officer finally spoke quietly to Mitchell, out of frame. "We confirmed everything." Mitchell did not remove the cuffs. The refusal to de-escalate, even after confirmation, exposed the core issue. The stop had never been about verification. It had been about control. And in that moment, under public scrutiny, the pattern of mistreating black drivers, looking for crime where there was none, was no longer a complaint in a file. It was happening in real time. Within minutes of the detention, a patrol supervisor arrived at Riverside Plaza. Lieutenant Mark Alvarez stepped out of his vehicle with visible urgency. The crowd was still present. Phones were still recording. Chief Daniel Harris remained in handcuffs beside his own car. "What's going on?" Alvarez asked as he approached. Officer Mitchell answered first. "Suspicious vehicle. Possible theft investigation." Alvarez looked at Harris. "Sir, your name?" "Daniel Harris." He replied evenly. "Incoming police chief." There was a visible pause. Alvarez requested the identification directly. Harris indicated the wallet still in Mitchell's possession. The lieutenant reviewed the badge credential card and the official appointment letter issued by the city council. His posture changed immediately. He turned to Mitchell. "You confirmed the registration?" "Yes." "Dispatch cleared the plate?" "Yes." "Any report of a stolen Ferrari matching this VIN?" "No." Alvarez's tone hardened. "Then why is he in cuffs?" Mitchell hesitated. Something didn't add up. "That's not probable cause," Alvarez replied. The crowd heard it. The distinction was made publicly. Personal disbelief is not legal justification. Alvarez ordered the cuffs removed. "Take them off." Now, the metal clicked open. Harris lowered his arms slowly, but did not step away. At that moment, the liability became obvious. A lawful vehicle owner, fully compliant, had been detained without cause in front of witnesses. The bodycam had captured every statement, including the admission that the detention was based on what didn't make sense. Alvarez requested immediate preservation of all footage. "Secure the bodycam recording," he instructed the second officer. "No edits, no internal handling without chain of custody." Mitchell attempted to speak. "Lieutenant, I was just doing my job." "No," Alvarez interrupted. "You were exceeding it." The lieutenant stepped aside and contacted Internal Affairs directly from the scene. The conversation was brief and direct. "Unlawful detention, public setting, pattern history attached. We need immediate review." The pattern history was not speculation. Within the department database, Mitchell's prior complaints were accessible. 11 civilian complaints for alleging racial profiling, multiple dismissed internally, none resulting in suspension. Alvarez accessed the file from his in-car terminal while still in the parking lot. "You've had." For profiling complaints, he said quietly but firmly. They were unfounded, Mitchell responded. They were unproven, Alvarez corrected. "That's not the same thing." Harris stood nearby, listening. The situation had shifted from street-level authority to institutional accountability. What had been visible to bystanders was now visible in departmental records. The stop was not an isolated lapse. It followed a documented pattern of targeting black drivers and escalating stops without articulable cause. Alvarez addressed Harris directly. "Sir, I apologize for what occurred. This is exactly why I was hired." Harris responded. To stop this, the statement carried institutional weight. The city had publicly announced Harris's appointment as a reform measure to address racial profiling within the precinct. And on his first day, he had been handcuffed by the very behavior he was brought in to dismantle. Internal Affairs instructed that Officer Mitchell be relieved of field duty pending investigation. Alvarez turned to him. "You're off patrol effective immediately. Turn over your duty weapon." Mitchell froze. "Here? In front of everyone?" "Yes," Alvarez answered. "In front of everyone." The public nature of the correction mattered. The misconduct had been public. The response had to be visible. Mitchell removed his service weapon and handed it over. His badge followed. "This is administrative leave," Alvarez clarified. Pending full review, the crowd remained silent but attentive. The department's legal exposure was now evident. An unlawful detention, recorded admissions of bias, a documented complaint history, a public humiliation of the city's newly appointed police chief, hired specifically to end racial profiling. The jurisdictional failure was not abstract. A patrol officer had exercised authority beyond constitutional limits. Supervisory oversight had failed to address prior complaints. Internal review processes had allowed a pattern to continue unchecked. Alvarez spoke into his radio again. "Notify command staff." Immediate policy review requested. The institutional turning point was no longer about a single stop. It was about systemic liability. Harris addressed the lieutenant one final time before leaving the scene. "This is not about embarrassment," he said. "It's about reform." Alvarez nodded. "Understood." The patrol cars pulled back. The crowd dispersed slowly. The Ferrari remained where it had been parked legally from the start. But inside the department, the consequences were already moving. Within 48 hours of the incident, the department announced a formal internal affairs investigation. The bodycam footage was secured, copied, and placed under independent review. The mayor's office issued a public statement acknowledging serious concerns regarding unlawful detention and potential racial profiling. The facts were not in dispute. The footage showed a compliant black man being handcuffed without probable cause. It captured the officer stating that the stop was based on what didn't make sense. It recorded the dismissal of documentation that had already been verified. It showed escalation without evidence. The city's legal department moved quickly. Liability was obvious. During the preliminary review meeting, a city attorney spoke plainly. "The exposure here is significant. This is unlawful detention in a public setting, documented admission of subjective suspicion, and a prior complaint history involving similar conduct." Another official added, "And the individual detained was targeted because he was a black man in a luxury vehicle. That will not play well before a jury." Chief Daniel Harris declined to minimize the event. Although he had authority within the department, he made clear that the issue was larger than personal embarrassment. "This was not about me," Harris said during a closed session with city officials. "This was about a pattern of stopping black drivers and looking for crime where there isn't any." Civil rights attorneys were consulted. Within 2 weeks, a formal notice of intent to file a civil rights lawsuit was submitted on behalf of Harris in his personal capacity. The filing cited violations of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure, unlawful detention, and discriminatory enforcement. The complaint detailed the officers record 11 civilian complaints over 9 years for alleging racial profiling, 7 alleging aggressive conduct during stops involving black motorists, none resulting in suspension. The document argued that the department had failed to intervene despite repeated warning signs. During a mediation session, the city's outside counsel addressed the financial risk directly. "If this proceeds to trial," she said, "damages could exceed 7 figures. Punitive exposure is real given the pattern history." The case did not go to trial. After negotiations, The city approved a settlement totaling $0.4 million. The breakdown was publicly disclosed. $1.6 million in compensatory damages for unlawful detention, reputational harm, and civil rights violations. $500,000 allocated for attorney's fees and litigation costs. $300,000 designated for community oversight, a bias-training fund tied directly to reform measures. During the public announcement, a reporter asked whether the payout was excessive. The city attorney responded, "The cost of unconstitutional policing is always higher than prevention." Officer Ryan Mitchell was terminated following the completion of the internal affairs investigation. The final report concluded that he had engaged in unlawful detention, conducted a search without probable cause, and demonstrated conduct consistent with prior allegations of racial bias. His badge was permanently revoked. His state certification was suspended pending review by the Peace Officer Standards Board. When notified of his termination, Mitchell argued that he had been proactive. The review board disagreed. Proactive policing does not mean inventing suspicion, one member stated. The investigation also revealed supervisory failures. The prior complaints alleging profiling had been closed. Without interviewing witnesses, one had been dismissed after an internal review that relied solely on the officer's written statement. No early intervention measures had been triggered despite the accumulation of complaints. That discovery widened the scope of reform. The department implemented mandatory bias reporting audits for all traffic stops. Officers were required to articulate specific, documented probable cause in writing within 2 hours of any detention. Failure to do so would trigger automatic supervisory review. A civilian oversight panel was granted expanded authority to access complaint records directly. Without filtering through internal command, bodycam policy was revised. Officers could no longer initiate discretionary searches without verbalizing clear legal grounds on camera before proceeding. During a town hall meeting, a resident stood and said, "This only changed because the wrong man got stopped." Chief Harris answered directly, "No, it changed because the truth was recorded." The incident forced acknowledgement of what many in the community had already experienced. Black drivers had reported being stopped for not fitting, for driving vehicles officers believed they could not afford, for existing in spaces where suspicion replaced evidence. The difference this time was visibility. The pattern was undeniable. In closing remarks at a press conference, Harris stated, "When a black man can be handcuffed for legally owning his own car, the system is not neutral. Reform is not optional. The settlement was costly. The termination was public. The policy overhaul was immediate. But the clearest consequence was institutional recognition that profiling had been tolerated too long. The cost was counted in dollars. The failure was counted in trust." This story is meant to generate awareness. It proves that racial profiling is not abstract, not historical, and not rare. It happens in ordinary places, during ordinary encounters, and it escalates because assumption replaces evidence. When suspicion is tied to race instead of behavior, constitutional rights become optional. In 2025, Black Americans were nearly 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans, and 77% of Black adults say they are treated less fairly by police than white people. Ask yourself, how many stops begin with "this doesn't make sense"? How many detentions are justified by disbelief instead of facts? How many complaints are dismissed until the wrong person is targeted in public view? If this had not been recorded, would anything have changed? If there had been no witnesses, no cameras, no credentials, what would the outcome have been? Do you know any organizations that work to protect the rights of Black people in America? Legal support groups, community safety initiatives, civil rights coalitions, or immigrant rights organizations? Share them in the comments. Let's support those working for justice and safety for all. Your voice matters. Public scrutiny matters. Accountability matters. Leave your thoughts below. Reflect on what you've seen. Discuss what needs to change. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.